Hey there, I'm Sean Finnegan, and you are listening to Restitutio, a podcast that seeks to recover authentic Christianity and live it out today. Have you settled for the status quo? Is your faith too small? These are important questions to ask yourself from time to time. Is God calling you to change something, move somewhere, or do something new? Today in our Heroes of Faith series, we'll look at the example of Elisha. He was a bold prophet who did extraordinary things for God in his lifetime. And I find his example inspiring, and I hope you will too. Here now is part 4 of our Heroes of Faith series, Elisha.
Elisha can show us what's possible, and he can teach us about boldness. We probably, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us need some boldness, right? A lot of us are a little too timid. Maybe there's a couple of us here and there that probably just need to take it down a notch, but really most of us probably just need a little more boldness. And so I think Elisha can help us with that. And we're going to start in 1 Kings chapter 19, where it says, "So he set out from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat, who was plowing. There were 12 yoke of oxen ahead of him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and threw his mantle over him." So this is the origin story of Elisha. You know, every superhero has an origin story. So does Elisha. Elisha is just a regular guy, probably a little bit jacked, strong, because he's plowing behind an ox, or 2 oxen, really, a yoke of oxen, and that does wonders for your shoulders over the years, I'm sure. Keeping this plow in place. Probably could handle his own in a fist fight. Who knows? But his dad, Shaphat, there's nothing about him in the Bible, so we don't know that he was of any significance. Elisha just think of him as like a regular guy. He's a farmer. They speculate about what his economic situation was. Some people think he was rich because there's 12 yoke of oxen, and he's in the back with the 12th. And they say, his parents must have had a lot of money and a lot of servants, and he's out there kind of like as the foreman running the crew. And then others say, oh, no, actually, we think he's poor because this was probably a community farm, and he just was contributing. He was working 1 pair of oxen while there were 11 others. It doesn't really tell us, but the impression I get is that he's an everyday kind of person. He's your average kind of regular guy. He doesn't come from a famous family, and he has a monotonous job. Just imagine for a moment walking behind a couple of oxen. I mean, has anybody ever mowed like a really big lawn? And the goal is just basically to make straight lines, right? So I imagine that's a lot of what we're talking about, is just keeping this thing from going over here or going over there, right? And you're just looking at the backside of a couple of oxen for hours and hours every day. Not necessarily the kind of person you would say, you know what, let's pick him to be the next great prophet of Israel. He's just normal. And yet Elijah comes up to him and throws his mantle on him. A mantle is like a garment, maybe like an overgarment that goes on top, a large scarf or something like that. And this is huge. Elijah is a big deal. Elijah is at the height of his career. Everybody knows Elijah. The king knows Elijah. Now, everybody knows the king, but does the king know you? Yes, the king knows Elijah. He has an opinion about him. The queen hates Elijah. There's just a lot of stories about what Elijah has done. Let me show you some of Elijah's miracles. This is already in the past by the time he meets Elisha. He predicted a drought. He was fed by ravens by a brook. So he predicts a drought, so it's not going to rain for a number of years. And then he hangs out by a brook, and birds fly him his food. That's unprecedented, right? Come on. Number 3, he multiplied a widow's oil and flour when he lived with her and her son. Number 4, he revived the widow's son. So that's a resurrection. That's pretty strong. Pretty good on the resume there, brought somebody back to life. Number 5, he called down fire from the sky to prove Yahweh is God over against 450 false prophets. It's an epic day in the life of a servant of God. It's 450 guys, and you know the story, right? It's a duel. It's a competition. You offer an animal, and then I'll offer an animal, and whichever God answers by fire, that's the true God. What do you say? Right? You know the whole story there. And Elijah comes out on top. You know, his God actually sends fire down from heaven. And Elijah is so bold as to douse his offering in water. And he pours water on it over it. It's just like unbelievable, right? This is that guy. Number 6, he predicted a rainstorm ending the drought. And number 7, he called fire down twice on groups of 50 who came to arrest him. Can you imagine that? The king's like, go get me that guy. I'm sick of his rebelliousness, and go get him. And he sends 50 guys, and nobody comes back. Then he does it again. Nobody comes back. Then he does it a third time. Do you remember this? And the third time, they say to Elijah, look, I'm just doing my job here. Please don't burn me and my 50 up. And Elijah says, all right, fine, I'll go. It works out. Yeah, Elijah is in the prime of his career. He's got 7 huge miracles, or 8, depending on how you count them. And that mantle that he throws on Elisha represents his spiritual power. It's like an invitation. Elijah is inviting Elisha to train with him. This is like Yoda going up to Luke Skywalker and says to him, train with me, will you? This is like at that level. Or Elon Musk going to a business school and picking one student and saying, quit college and come work for me, and I'll teach you everything I know. This is that level of an invitation that Elisha is receiving from the greatest prophet who had ever lived, at least that we know of in the Bible, right? Maybe you want to say Moses is better than Elijah? What do you think? I don't know. I think Elijah was pretty overpowered. I see Moses calling down fire. He split the sea, so we'll give him that. Anyhow, Elijah walks away. So he throws the mantle on him. You got the scene, right? You got 12 groups of oxen, 2 oxen each, and you have plows behind each one. Elijah's in the back. He gets this thing thrown on him, and now Elijah has to decide, what do I do? Because Elijah throws it on him, and then he just walks away. So Elisha has to decide, do I just keep plowing? Do I just keep, I'm a very task-oriented person. It takes a lot to knock me out of, what I'm doing. Oh, that's a nice mantle. Just you keep going, or what do you do? No, he doesn't. He decides he's going to run after Elijah. This is the opportunity of a lifetime. It's going to change everything, literally everything for him. Look at verse 20. He left the oxen, ran after Elijah, and said, let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you. Then Elijah said to him, go back again, for what have I done to you? Elijah requests special permission to say goodbye. You see that, right? And Elijah's response is confusing. I found this to be helpful. This is Simon de Vries in the Word Biblical Commentary. He says, Elisha immediately recognizes what the mantle means and runs after Elijah. He has a request to make. However, one that is met with skepticism on Elijah's part. Elisha only wants time to kiss his father and mother farewell. This sounds reasonable enough, but Elijah's response suggests that Elisha may be vacillating and will use the moment at home to drop out or hide away. The question, but what do I have to do with you, is therefore a challenge. It is up to Elisha to decide whether or not he will belong to Elijah permanently. I thought that was pretty helpful. Elisha is going to have to give up his entire life here. It's not just saying goodbye. It's saying, I'm going to be a different person. I'm going to live in a different location. I'm going to have a different job. Everything about my life is about to change. So it's understandable that there was a struggle you should have a struggle if God's calling you to something like this big, right? And then what do we see in verse 21? It says, he returned from following him, took the yoke of oxen, and slaughtered them. Using the equipment from the oxen, he boiled their flesh and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out and followed Elijah and became his servant. This is total commitment. You kill the oxen, you're not plowing anymore. You burn the equipment, you burn your plow, that's it. You just retired. It'd be like a mechanic throwing away all of his tools, right? The tools cost thousands of dollars. You need those to do your job. This is a bold move that Elisha makes here. It's a bold move. What about you? Have you committed? Have you slaughtered your oxen? Have you burned your plows? Have you had moments in your life where you've done this, where you said to yourself, you know what, I'm going to make it impossible for me to go back to my old way of doing things? Is it time for you to make a bold move? Jerry shared about this a number of weeks ago. There was a Spanish conqueror named Cortez who was having some trouble convincing his guys in Mexico to advance and to attack. So he burned all the ships. You heard this story before? This is like a saying in the English language, burning your ships. They couldn't go home to Spain anymore after he burned all their ships. It's the same idea. Elisha just burned all his ships. That can be scary. In 2 Kings chapter 2, we pick up the next incident in Elisha's life that I want to cover with you. And likewise, Elisha makes a bold move. So just to summarize this last one, I think what we saw was we had Elisha not sure. He's vacillating. He's saying, well, let me say goodbye to my parents. Jesus picks up this later, right? When somebody comes to Jesus and they say, oh, let me just say goodbye to my parents. And what does Jesus say? No one putting their hand to the plow and looking back is of any use for the kingdom. What do you think he's talking about? He's talking about Elisha, right? This sort of uncertainty. God's not going to work with that. He wants commitment. He wants somebody that is going to be serious. And so after Elijah challenges him, Elisha doesn't just say goodbye to his parents. He blows up the whole business that he had. like there's no going back anymore. But that's nothing compared to the next thing he does. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 1 says, now when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel. But Elisha said, as the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel. Elisha is bold. Do you get that? Elijah says, stay here. Elisha says, no, I'm going with you. That's a bold move. He's not going to sit this one out. He knows something big is about to go down. He's not going to miss it. So he's going to go. After a while, Elijah says to him again, he says, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho. And Elisha says, no, I'm going with you to Jericho. They get to Jericho, and Elijah says to Elisha, stay here, I'm going to Jordan. And Elisha once again says, no, I'm going with you to Jordan. This guy, you can't get rid of him. Once you got him on the team, he's not going anywhere. Look in verse 8. Then they get to Jordan, and it says, then Elijah took his mantle, rolled it up, and struck the water. The water was parted to the one side and to the other, and the two of them crossed on dry ground. Excuse me? It's not a move. I've read the Bible. This is not a thing. Moses split the Red Sea. That was impressive. And there was a time with Joshua where the whole group of all the Israelites was crossing, and the water kind of got dammed up or something miraculously. But nobody smacks the water with a piece of fabric. That's not a thing. What do you do when you want to cross the Jordan? It's not that big. If you want to cross the Jordan River, what do? You look for a bridge. Or you hike up your tunic and you wade through it. It's only waist high. You know what I mean? Like, you don't take off your scarf and smack the water with it. It's just a really weird thing. And you don't really see it other places in the Bible either. Just contemplate that for a second. That's the level of relationship Elijah has with God. There's not even a mention of a prayer. He's just like, I got to cross this blasted Jordan River again. Because God had to do it. A lot, smacking water with a piece of clothing, what's that going to do? It's going to get your clothes wet. And his miracle is so casual. Look at the next verse. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you. Elisha said, please let me inherit a double share of your spirit. What? You got to be kidding me. What do you think Elijah should say here? Elisha, who do you think you are? I just split a river. What do you want, split 2 rivers? A short time ago, he was in utter despair, and Elijah had said, I am no better than my fathers. And here is this Elisha, this new guy. Oh, I want to be twice as good as you. It's a different attitude, right? Jesus said, it is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher. Elisha says, I want to be twice as powerful as the teacher. It's a bold move. What about you? Do you have the chutzpah to ask God for something big? Do you have the guts, the courage to ask God for something really big in your life? James said, you have not because you ask not. I think a lot of times we just go with the status quo and we say, well, that's just the way the world works. Yeah, normally. But there are people out there, and especially in the Bible, who smacked water with a piece of clothing and it split. You think that God is dead? Now look, I'm not saying name it and claim it. I want to be careful here. I'm not saying blab it and grab it. I'm not saying whatever you want, God's going to do because he's a cosmic vending machine who, you just put in the name of Jesus Christ, amen, and out comes whatever you want. I'm not saying that, okay? But have we gone too far the other way? Have we gone too far the other way from saying, anything I want I can get at any time to nothing do I want because, God doesn't want me to have it, so I'm not going to ask. You know what I mean? These are extremes. These are extremes. On the one extreme, you're confessing things that are just make you sound delusional. And on the other end, you're so timid that nobody in the world is even interested in your faith because it just kind of seems like a downer. There's got to be some place else that we can operate like Elijah and like Elisha. Okay, maybe you're not going to be at their level, but that same God is alive and at work today. And like I told you, Elisha is just a regular guy. He's not somebody that grew up in the school of the prophets. They had a school of the prophets at the time. Elisha's not in it. He's just plowing with the oxen. So I think it's possible to really see incredible things in our lives. Are you satisfied? Here's a question for you. Are you satisfied with your level of impact for God in your life right now? Are you satisfied in what you're able to do for God in your neighborhood, in your town, at your job? Or do you want more? I think Elisha is saying to us, there's more. He saw Elijah. I showed you the 7 miracles. Plus, then there's the 8th miracle, which we're about to see with the chariots of fire. And he says, I'm going to take double. Hit me up for double or nothing. Really, that's what he's going to get, because either he's going to get smacked down and said, who do you think you are? Or he's going to get twice the power of Elijah. It's incredible. Maybe it's time to pick up some of Elisha's boldness. Look at verse 10. How did Elijah respond? You twerp! You arrogant weasel! You'd be lucky to get half of my spiritual... No, that's not what it says. Sorry, that's not in the Bible. I made that up. All right, verse 10, it says, he responded, you have asked a hard thing. Yet, if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a yes. He said yes. I'd like to have, what do you want? Elisha, you won't leave me alone. Everywhere I go, you keep following me. I'm trying to get away. What do you want? Just want twice your spiritual power, man. And he says yes. If you stick around for a little longer and you see this whole thing go, yes, you can have it. The power of the ask. Having the boldness to ask for something. Pray big and believe big and see what God does. You know, Rich was sharing about our children's initiative in the Congo countries. This past year, we sent over $246,000 to the Congo countries. We have no business doing that. Who do we think we are? We're just a little church in Latham, New York. How do we get off having a children's 100 kids? And we helped to build a church this past year. That was a lot of the cost. And we did an economic initiative to help individuals in the churches start their own businesses. Where did that come from? God worked with it. So it's not about how big you are or how big we are as a community. It's about how big God is. Are you willing to partner with Him? Because like Rich said, these are our brothers and sisters over there. We're not supporting just random people. Like these are people, like I've sat with them. I know these people, not all of them. And a number of others who have gone over the years have sat with them. So I think that's an example of God doing a big thing in our world today. Look at verse 11. As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them. And Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. Verse 13, he picked up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water. He said, "Where is Yahweh, the God of Elijah? Where is he?" He struck the water again, and the water was parted to one side and to the other, and Elisha crossed over. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. This is incredible. So bold. He received a promise. What was the promise? If you see me go off, and we're not going to get into the theology of what in the world ended up happening with Elijah and the chariot, but whatever. It was crazy, right? Chariots of fire. He's gone. Elisha's like, look, well, I saw him leave. I get the promise. I get the promise. He said, it's a hard thing, but if I see him go, then I get the promise. So that means I got the promise. He's not going to hesitate. He's not going to wait till next Tuesday to find out if it's true. The mantle fell. He's like, well, the mantle's mine now. He takes the mantle. He smacks the water. And nothing happens. Nothing happens. Did you catch that? Nothing happens. And then he says, "Where is Yahweh, the God of Elisha?" And hits it a second time, and then it splits. Don't miss the failures. Don't miss the disappointments. We get one disappointment. We're praying and praying and praying. We don't get the healing we're asking for. We're like, well, prayer doesn't work. Yeah, there is disappointment in a walk of faith. But look at Elisha. He kept going. He persisted. He didn't just say, oh, shoot, I knew this wasn't going to work. Who did I think I was, asking for a double portion? I didn't even get half. I would have liked to see the water just go down a little bit. Nothing happened the first time he hit it. Look at it again. Verse 14. He took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him and struck the water. He said, "Where is Yahweh, the God of Elijah? Where is he?" He struck the water again, and the water was parted to the one side and to the other, and Elisha crossed over. I think there's a lot of parallels to our lives with this, where you just can't give up when you have a setback, when you can't give up when you fall. If you fall, you get back up, you try again. right? And this is something that you see with kids, right? Like a kid is learning to ride a bike with no training wheels, and the kid falls, and it hurts. It's scary. And then, what does the parent do? The parent says, you know what? Bikes are terrible. All people that ride bikes are idiots. I never rode a bike. You shouldn't ride a bike. Let's just give up on bikes for life. No, what parent would do that? No, the parent says, all right, well, let's get a Band-Aid on your boo-boo, and, let's make sure everything's okay, and, maybe that's enough for one day. But then, a day later or a week later or whatever, you say, well, you want to try that again? I'll hold on to the back this time until you tell me to let go. You know what I mean? Like, we understand this when it comes to other people, but when it's ourselves, we're just like, oh, one big failure and we're out. If we want to be bold for God, we need to be able to be resilient as well. Look, we all mess up. We all fail. That's part of life. It's okay. You get back up and you live for God. Dare to do something big for God this year. That's what I'm challenging you to do. I'm challenging you to ask yourself the question, what's my bold move for God in 2024? That's what I want you to ask. And I don't want you to, and I want you to balance this with wisdom. I don't want your bold move to be something that's sinful, okay? I want it to be something that God's actually calling you to do. If you're feeling entrapped as a parent and you're like, oh gosh, I just wish I could leave my family behind and live in the Swiss Alps. Yes, that's a bold move, but that's not wise, it's not godly. He's not calling you to do that. Unless you take your family with you, then it might make sense. But my point is, what is the bold move God wants for you today? Many of you have God stories. Many of you could testify of times in which God has done extraordinary things in your life. And you might be thinking to yourself, I stood for God in my time. It's time for the next generation to stand for God and for them to have their God stories. But I want to encourage you, no matter how old you are, that's not how Elijah rolled. Elijah stood for God, experienced God, walked with God, until he got taken away in a chariot of fire. There was no like, oh, well, let me just pass it on to you and then I'll just go retire. I'm not against retirement from your job. I'm just saying you don't retire from God. You don't retire from your faith. You don't retire from asking God day after day, how can I serve you today? A lot of times God just needs somebody to be open to do His will in a situation. And if we're closed, then we can't do it. Elisha says, I want double the power. He says that to the greatest prophet, if you count by miracles. The greatest prophet, maybe Moses is better, I don't know. But like one of the greatest prophets ever, he said, I want double your power. And God said, yes. Take a look at this, Elisha's miracles. Splitting the Jordan with Elijah's mantle. We covered it. Healing the waters of Jericho with salt. Number 3, he has a prophecy of water coming to save the military. There was a coalition of 3 kings, Israel, Judah, and Edom, and they were going to fight against Moab. They had marched for 7 days. There wasn't enough water. They were all freaked out. They were like, I can't believe this is happening. We're going to be destroyed before we even fight because we're out of water. And so the king of Judah, a guy named Jehoshaphat, says, well, isn't there a prophet of Yahweh around here somewhere? And the king of Israel says, yeah, there's this guy, Elisha. We could go visit him. And so they go over to see Elisha, and it's hysterical what he says. Let me just show you this. It's in 2 Kings chapter 3. 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 13. So it's just a chapter over from where we were. So they go over to see Elisha, and this is a big deal. Imagine the president of Canada, the United States, and Mexico coming to the prophet's house. This is like the level, these are kings. And Elisha says in 2 Kings 3:13, Elisha said to the king of Israel, what have I to do with you? Go to your father's prophets or to your mother's. You don't talk to the king that way. Come on. Because their prophets are for a different God. That was his point. It's like, why don't you go ask your prophets about your God, see if he can help you. Bold guy, right? But the king of Israel said to him, no, it is Yahweh who has summoned these 3 kings to hand them over to Moab. Elisha said, verse 14, as Yahweh of hosts lives, whom I serve, were it not that I have regard for King Jehoshaphat of Judah, I would give neither a look nor a glance. He's a bold guy. I mean, Elisha is not a normal person. He is bold. Verse 15, but get me a musician. Get me somebody to play a harp or something. You know, we need to hear from the Lord. And then, while the musician was playing, the hand of Yahweh came on him, and he said, thus says Yahweh, I will make this wadi full of pools. Verse 17, for thus says Yahweh, you shall see neither rain nor wind, but the wadi shall be filled with water so that you shall drink, and you and your army and your animals. And this is the part I like, verse 18. This is only a trifle in the sight of Yahweh, for he will also hand Moab over to you. Elisha's like, this is not even hard for my God to give you this water. It's not even like it's just a trifle. Because what did they do? They asked the prophet. They finally asked God for the help they needed. And the prophet speaks for God and says, you know, this is no big deal. All right, sorry, I got distracted there. So we're not going to go into number 4 here, but there was an incident where, you know, there's some debate in the translation. Is it boys? Is it young adults? But some guys, young guys or older kids, made fun of Elisha and said, go up, bald man. And Elisha cursed them. He called a curse on them. And then 2 female bears came out and attacked the kids. So you don't want to ever call a man of God, make fun of him for being bald. Just going to say that out for my brothers who for whom this might resonate. You know, and say, you know, it's just a bad idea. You never know if some bears are outside just licking their lips, waiting to come in. But anyhow, what an unprecedented situation. He really did have twice the power of Elijah. Like, he didn't even say anything to the bears. He just said, you know, cursed be these kids for making fun of me or whatever. And God's like, all right, well, you're going to call a curse on them. Well, let's get bear number 1 and bear number 2 out here. It's incredible. Number 5, he multiplied a widow's oil, which is somewhat similar to Elijah before him. Number 6, he predicted a woman would give birth. You know, it's crazy because this lady was wealthy, she was content, she was married, and she was fine not having children. She was totally fine. She was at peace with it. She was just really kind to Elisha. Every time he came by, she would bring him over for dinner. And over time, she said, you know, let's just build a separate guest room for him on the roof, and we'll put a bed and a chair and a table and a lamp, and you know, we'll furnish it, we'll make it nice for him. This way, when he comes by on his normal circuit to go throughout the land, he'll have a place to stay. And Elisha is so overwhelmed. He's like, oh, thank you so much. This is so wonderful. What can I do for you? You know, I know the king. You want me to put in a word for you with the king about some issue? And she's like, no, I'm good. I got everything I need. And then he prophesies to her and he says, this time next year you will have a child. And she says to him, don't you tease me. She said, I didn't ask for that. Don't be making promises. Don't get my hopes up for something that I didn't even ask for. And sure enough, the next year she has a child. It's a miracle baby. She loves this child's probably spoiled rotten. She loves the child, and the child grows up a little bit, and he's working in the field with his dad, and he gets really sick. He says, ow, my head, my head. The dad is like super non-sensitive. He's just like, go to your mother. And then he comes in, and he dies. The child dies. And so she is furious. She's so furious. She takes her dead child and puts it on the guest bed of Elisha. This is your problem. And then she saddles a donkey and she races over to him. And she gets all the way over to him, and he sends he sees her coming. Elisha sees her coming. He sends out his servant to her, and she won't tell the servant what's going on. So she gets there and she grabs that prophet by the legs, by his feet, and says, Did I not say to you, don't tease me? Did I say to you, don't mess around here? I didn't ask for this. You gave me this child. And Elisha's just like, whew, this is a tough one, right? And he says to his servant Gehazi, he says, take this staff and rush ahead. I'd probably ride an animal or something. Rush ahead and put the staff on the child, and the child will come back to life. And the lady says, her name is the Shunammite woman, because we don't know her name, but we know her place. She says to Elisha, she says, I'm not leaving you until you come. Basically, the same thing Elisha has said to Elijah, she says to him. He's like, all right, I'll go. So this is a forceful person. She's powerful. And she drags his butt there and puts him in the room with the dead child. Meanwhile, Gehazi comes back. He says to Elisha, it didn't work. Nothing happened. This stupid staff thing. What were you thinking? So Elisha's in the room with the dead child on his bed. Everyone else is outside. And he's just alone. What's he going to do? It's his responsibility. He's got to figure it out. This lady's seriously ticked off at him. And so all the scripture says is that he prayed. It doesn't tell us what he said. He doesn't say, oh, where is the God of Elijah now? There was no indication exactly what it says. Let's look at what it says here in verse 31 of chapter 4. Let's look at verse 33. So he went in and closed the door on the two of them and prayed to Yahweh. That's all it says, prayed to the Lord. Verse 34, then he got up on the bed and lay upon the child, putting his mouth upon his mouth, his eyes upon his eyes, his hands upon his hands, and while he lay bent over him, the flesh of the child became warm. Verse 35, he got down, walked once to and fro in the room, then got up again and bent over him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. You can't formalize that. You can't formalize that and say, oh, well, the next time I come across a dead person in a hospital, I'm just going to do this. I mean, it's not going to hurt, probably, right? You could try. But, this is what God had him do in that particular situation because he's had the boldness to say, God, help me fix this child. He had the boldness to try. Which one of us would have the boldness to even try? Here's the thing. We have so many examples of this in the Bible, right? We have Jesus doing this. We have one or two of the apostles doing this. He doesn't have all of that. Elijah had done something similar, but that's about it, right? We have so much more, and yet we would be probably too timid to try this, and yet he has the boldness to say, you know what, God, I don't care if I have to defile myself by touching a corpse, which was a defiling act according to their law. He would be unclean after this and have to go through an extensive cleansing ritual. I'm going to do what you say. And he says, do this. And he did it. That's the bold move of Elisha. So just closing thoughts. Once again, I ask you the question, what bold move does God have for you in this year? What is he calling you to? What is he calling you to stop doing? What is he calling you to start doing? Where is he calling you to have increased influence on his behalf? Don't sell yourself short. Let's be inspired by Elisha.
Well, that brings this sermon to a close. What did you think? Come on over to restitutio.org and find episode 621, Heroes of Faith, Elisha, and leave your feedback there. Someone named Dynamic commented in on episode 612, which was a presentation I did on Colossians 1:16 called Colossians 1:16, Old Creation or New Creation. This was a research paper that I presented at the England UCA conference back in July. Anyhow, Dynamic wrote saying, is the video of this presentation going to be released? Well, that's a great question. Yes, that video should be coming out. I know that it was recorded and it's been edited. We have actually edited versions of all the videos from that conference, but they're not yet posted on our YouTube channel. And so I would say they will be coming out on the UCA YouTube channel, but mine won't be first. The first one will be Jerry Weirwool's presentation on Hebrews 1, 8, and 9. Then I think mine is after that. I can't say when these will be out for sure, but if you want to know, the best thing to do would be to go ahead and subscribe to the Unitarian Christian Alliance channel on YouTube and enable notifications, and then you'll know right when it comes out. But yes, that is going to be coming out, and it is going to be professionally edited. If you would like to read the paper, which of course goes into much more depth than I was able to present in the lecture itself, that is already available on my website, restitutio.org. And I also have an academia.edu profile or page. I don't know what you call it on there. So if you want the full scoop, you can just go to restitutio.org and click on the articles tab. And the first one of the articles, which is listed chronologically. So the top on the stack there is Colossians 1:16, Old Creation or New Creation. And that'll give you access to the full paper and all the reasons why I think Colossians 1:16 is clearly talking about new creation. When it says, in him all things were created, it's talking about how in Christ new creation was brought about. Specifically, authority structures is in view here in Colossians 1:16. And I think this is a position that really does hold up to scrutiny quite well. On last week's episode, 620, Heroes of Faith, Part 3 with Hannah, I wrestled with the question of why Elkanah, Hannah's husband, had two wives. Someone named Adam wrote in saying maybe he was fulfilling his duty as kinsman redeemer by having Peninnah as his second wife. We just don't have enough data, but it's funny how we tend to imagine the ulterior motive first. By the way, the Bible describes polygamous situations as universally unhappy ones. Well, thanks for writing in, Adam. I think this is a valid possibility that you bring up, that this is a levirate marriage, but not as likely. We know for sure that Hannah couldn't have kids. That's kind of what's driving the whole plot there in the story. We know that Peninnah had a bunch of kids. And we know that this fact tormented Hannah and that Hannah was likely the first wife because her name is mentioned first. So I think this evidence leads to the conclusion that because Hannah was barren, Elkanah followed the standard protocol of the ancient Near Eastern culture and married a second wife so that he could have children to not only work but also pass on the inheritance and the land. They had such a high view of the land and passing on the land and not diminishing the land. I think that many of us don't see. I think that many of us don't feel in our times today where we just will pick up and move from one city to another for work. Oh, my job tells me I have to go over here. Oh, I'll just go over there. And there's no sense of connection to the land, at least for most Americans, I'd say. I'm sure there are exceptions to that. But this is also what Abraham did. Abraham couldn't have any children by Sarah, and so Sarah said, hey, why not take Hagar, my servant, as a surrogate? And then this is something we see with Rachel as well, when she wasn't able to have kids. She used her maidservant as a surrogate, and then Leah ended up doing the same thing. So this is something that we see like throughout the Bible as a way of dealing with the issue of infertility. And I don't think the text necessarily condemns Elkanah for doing that, but Adam's point is still valid. His point that the Bible describes polygamous situations as universally unhappy ones. I totally agree. And this is a bit subtle for most people because there's no law against marrying multiple women, either in the Old Testament or the New Testament. The only prohibition I can find is that to be an elder in the church, you should be the husband of one wife. Of course, there's all kinds of debate about what exactly that means and what that excludes, but it certainly does prohibit. Everyone agrees it prohibits having two or more wives at once for church leaders. And so I think that that's pretty clear for those of us who are in leadership that this is a requirement. Even so, Adam is exactly right. Though the Bible never outright condemns polygamy, it shows by example that all the cases of it result in serious problems. So I think if you're observing a curve in the road and you see that over and over, cars are getting into accidents because they can't turn as sharply as the curve is in the road, then you start to recognize, maybe I should slow down around this curve. You kind of learn from the mistakes of others, right? Isn't that part of how God wired our brains to function, this idea of intuition? The Bible doesn't outright condemn polygamy. It just shows you like car wreck after car wreck. And I think the attuned reader should get the idea that polygamy does not work well. So anyhow, I encourage you to have only one wife or be single. I think singleness is awesome. And if you're single, you have incredible opportunities to serve God that those of us who are married don't have. So singleness or married to one spouse, that would be the way to go. Well, that's going to be it for today. Thanks, everybody, for listening here to the end. If you'd like to support us, you can do that at restitutio.org. I'll catch you next time, and remember, the truth has nothing to fear.